The last light of day brushed a golden trail across the Brazos River, where the cold current didn't care who was white and who was native. On that dusty edge of the Wild West, on what seemed like any other day, a solitary man stepped unknowingly into the turning point of his life. Elijah Grant rode across the shallow bend of the river boots, heavy with dust. His shadow stretched long across the cracked earth. His shirt was worn thin, his hands still carrying the smell of horse oil and old tobacco. He couldn't remember the last time he spoke to another soul, maybe at a supply post near Del Rio, or some nameless saloon where he'd left behind pieces of a past too broken to carry. He wasn't a hero, and he sure wasn't trying to be a good man. But fate has a way of making you choose whether you want to or not. That's when Elijah heard a splash upstream. At first he figured it was a deer drinking or a bear passing through. But then came another sound, urgent, wild, the thrashing of limbs, and then an eerie silence. He urged his horse forward toward the noise. Through the brush and gathering dusk, he spotted a small figure caught in the current. A girl, long black hair trailed like soaked ribbon behind her. A body wrapped in coarse traditional cloth flailing in the icy swirl. Without thinking, Elijah leapt off his horse and ran into the river. The cold bit through him like steel. The current tugged at his legs as if it meant to drag not only his body, but every ghost he carried down into the depths. He pushed forward toward her like it was his brother Tommy, drowning again, the one he couldn't save back in Gettysburg. He reached her just as her face dipped beneath the surface. She was still breathing, barely murmuring something in a language he didn't understand. Blood streaked her forehead. Elijah dragged her to shore quickly, building a small fire with dry pine and dead leaves. He wrapped his coat around her and sat beside her in silence, hands shaking not from cold, but something deeper waking inside him. Her name was Ayanna Redbird. He would learn that 2 days later, when she was strong enough to whisper in broken English laced with Lakota tones. But that night, beneath the howling wind and endless dark, they were just two people, one nearly dead in the body and one long dead in the soul. Elijah didn't know then, but in her world, his actions meant far more than he could grasp. In Lakota tradition, saving someone from the sacred river tied two spirits together. It was a sign from the ancestors. And to Ayanna, it was more than gratitude. It was a call from something deeper than logic. Her heart chose him, even though it had been taught that white men should never be trusted. As dawn broke, she looked at him, eyes deep as summer soil, a gaze not of pleading or debt, but of understanding. Elijah turned away. He didn't want thanks. And he didn't want someone seeing too far into the wreckage of his spirit. But something had already begun. 2 days later, 12 Lakota riders appeared. They didn't come with spears or anger, only with a ritual. The girl had chosen him as her husband. No one asked him what he thought, no explanations, just Ayanna standing before her people, head held high, pointing to Elijah. He didn't know what felt worse, being swept into something beyond his control, or the feeling for the first time in his life of being chosen. Not out of duty, not out of guilt, but because someone believed he might be a safe place, maybe even a future. He could have said no. He probably should have. But the nod came like a tired breath. And just like that, the storm began. The town of Howard Dry Hollow had always kept its distance from outsiders, from change, and especially from anything that didn't come wrapped in white skin and Sunday suits. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, and they liked it that way. So when a man like Elijah Grant, quiet and scarred, started showing up more regularly, folks noticed. And when he came back with a native girl riding behind him, wrapped in his old duster and eyes full of storm, that wasn't something Dry Hollow could ignore. They arrived just before noon. The sun was high, casting long shadows across the wooden porches and dust-blown alleys. People peeked through shutters and squinted through storefront glass. Children stopped playing. A dog barked and kept barking until someone kicked its side. It wasn't the kind of silence that meant peace. It was the kind that meant something was about to break. Elijah dismounted slowly. His boots touched the ground like thunder. Ayanna slid down behind him. She stood tall, despite the glares, her chin raised in a way that silenced even the whispers for a moment. She didn't hide behind him. She didn't flinch. If anything, she looked at Dry Hollow like a mountain looks at the wind, unmoving, ancient, proud. "Who is she?" someone hissed from a porch. Better question, came another voice. "What's she doing with him?" The general store door creaked open. Sheriff Duffy stepped out, his badge catching the light, the weight of authority heavy on his belt alongside a loaded Colt. and 30 years of keeping the town pure. He was tall, thick-shouldered, with a mustache that curled like a snake and eyes that held no forgiveness. He was law here not because of the paper pinned to his chest, but because folks let him be. Elijah, he said, slowly, voice smooth but tight. You brought company. Elijah didn't answer. She got a name. This girl, Duffy asked, stepping closer, one hand casually resting on the handle of his pistol. Ayanna spoke before Elijah could. I am Ayanna Redbird, daughter of Chaska. I come in peace. Duffy smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That's so peace from which side of the line, miss? Ayanna said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence said everything about who she was and who she refused to bow to. She nearly died, Elijah finally said, voice low. I brought her here to rest. We won't be long. Duffy's smile flattened. This town ain't a resting place for her kind. Then it ain't much of a town, Elijah replied. The silence grew sharper. Duffy stepped back, eyes narrowing. Don't push your luck, Grant. This place remembers things. Folks buried by the river, they had reasons. Ayanna's hand found Elijah's without looking. He didn't pull away. They moved toward the edge of town, toward the small shack Elijah sometimes slept in near the blacksmith's shed. The walk felt longer than it should have. Every step drew stares, every glance a silent judgment. That night, the stars hung heavy, and Dry Hollow whispered behind closed doors. Inside Elijah's cabin, Ayanna wrapped herself in a blanket near the fire. She traced symbols in the dust with her finger symbols of her people of ancestors who rode before railroads carved the land in half. You do not have to stay, she said softly. Elijah looked up. And leave you with them. With your people. Elijah's jaw tightened. They ain't mine. She nodded like she already knew. Bah. Morning brought more than sunlight. It brought whispers that turned into warnings, warnings that turned into threats. Someone threw a rock through Elijah's window. Another left a dead coyote on his steps. On the third day, a note appeared scrawled in chalk across the door. Savage lover. Elijah didn't flinch when he read it. He only picked up his axe and chopped wood until the sun burned high enough to sweat the ghost out of his skin. Ayanna never asked him to explain. She knew pain when she saw it. His silence was a language she understood. He had lived through war, through loss, through a town that never forgave what it couldn't control. But not everyone in Dry Hollow shared Duffy's hatred. Hannah Miller, the school teacher with quiet eyes and a heart made of steadier things, came by that afternoon. She brought bread, she brought a book of poetry, and she brought a warning. Duffy's stirring folks, she said gently. He says she's a spy, that her people are scouting for a raid. Elijah leaned on the porch rail. That's nonsense. I know, Hannah said, but that doesn't matter. He wants blood, not truth. Ayanna stepped out, brushing her hands on her skirt. You are kind to bring bread, she said, nodding respectfully. Hannah managed a smile. I don't know if kindness will be enough. And it wouldn't be. Ma'am. That evening, the town held a meeting in the church hall. Wooden pews, candles flickering, Duffy standing at the pulpit like a preacher of fear. She's not like us, he said. She doesn't belong here. He's endangering every child in this town. What if they come for her? What if this is a setup? He didn't have to say more. The room filled with murmurs. Agreement was easy when it dressed like safety. Back at the cabin, Elijah sat in the dark. Ayanna lit a small bundle of sage, waved the smoke in slow circles, and whispered words to the night. Words not meant for fear, but for strength. They will come, she said. Your sheriff, the angry ones. I know. You can let me go. I won't. She turned to him. Why? He looked at her for a long moment, then said, because when I pulled you from that river, it felt like I pulled myself out too. Outside, a wind rose. Dust curled around the edge of town like a warning. The horizon held no moon, only silence and something coming with it. Master. It happened on a Thursday. No one ever remembered what day peace ended, only how it broke. And in Dry Hollow, it broke the moment Ayanna walked into the center of town alone. Head-high steps, sure the silence of her people trailing behind her like wind over dry bones. The church bell hadn't rung yet, but folks gathered anyway. Word had spread like fire on summer brush. She's gonna speak, someone whispered. In public, in front of God in the town. Elijah wasn't with her. That was by her choice. This has to be mine, she had said softly before dawn. I will not be hidden, not again. He wanted to follow. Every part of him burned to be at her side. But something in her voice, something in the way she touched his cheek with trembling fingers stopped him. He let her go, but not far. Not really. From the porch of the blacksmith's barn, Elijah stood like a mountain watching the storm gather. Sheriff Duffy was already there standing near the well in the center of town. Behind him, the butcher, the banker, a handful of ranchers with thick wrists and thicker tempers, all of them waiting for a reason to explode. Ayanna didn't flinch. She stood in front of them, no weapon, no allies, only truth in her bones. I come not to take anything, she said clearly. I come to honor the man who pulled me from death, who asked for nothing but gave me everything. Duffy scoffed. You think words change the blood in your veins, girl? Ayanna turned toward the gathered crowd. My people believe when two lives are tied by rescue, their fates are joined. That is what happened between me and Elijah Grant. I was not forced. I chose. The words hung heavy, and then I choose him as husband, as partner, as the one I walk beside until the stars fall. Gasps. Someone dropped a jug. A child whispered, Mama, what does she mean? And Duffy stepped forward, jaw clenched. This isn't your land. This isn't your place. And that man, he's one of us. You don't get to choose him. Behind him, murmurs grew into murmurs of agreement. Fear disguised as righteousness. Fear of bloodlines, of change, of losing what never belonged to them in the first place. Then a voice broke through. Maybe it's not your choice to make sheriff. All heads turned. It was Hannah Miller, the school teacher. She stepped down from the church steps, her face pale but steady. She made a vow, Hannah said, and he hasn't denied it. Duffy's hand rested on his holster. That's not the law, Miss Miller. No, she said, but it's something bigger. It's called truth. Duffy's lip curled. I knew this would happen, he hissed. I warned you all. She's infected him, tamed him like a wild dog. And if we let this stand, we invite their kind into our homes, our schools, our blood. You don't speak for us, another voice called. This time it was old man Dalton, the retired stagecoach driver. His legs shook, but his words didn't. That boy Elijah, he saved my niece from drowning 4 winters ago. Didn't ask for thanks then neither. If he chooses this woman, then hell, maybe he sees something in her we forgot how to see in ourselves. Now it was crumbling. The division, the illusion of unity. Some folks turned toward Dalton and Hannah. Others turned toward Duffy. And through it all, Ayanna stood motionless like a tree in a storm. Then came the final shove. Duffy drew his revolver. It wasn't fast. It wasn't even surprising. He had been itching for a reason. But what no one expected, what not even Elijah expected, was that Ayanna didn't flinch. She didn't beg. She didn't run. She stepped forward, and that was when Elijah moved. From across the street, he stepped out of the shadows, every step like thunder on the boards. You'll have to shoot me first, he said, voice low but echoing like iron. Duffy turned, eyes blazing. You'd point a gun at your own kind for her. Elijah didn't draw. Didn't need to. She's more my kind than you've ever been. For a long moment, nothing moved. Even the dust seemed to hang in the air, holding its breath. Then, like a match burning, too long. Duffy's temper flared. He lifted the gun. And a shot rang out, but it wasn't Duffy's. It came from the side from the widow, Lois McCrae, who hadn't spoken at a town meeting in 10 years, but now stood on her porch rifle, smoking eyes cold. I aimed for the sky, she said simply. Next one goes between the eyes. Duffy turned, disbelieving. Y'all gone mad. No, Elijah said, stepping beside Ayanna now. We just stopped being scared of you. And just like that, the tide broke. Half the town turned away from Duffy. A few dropped their guns, some back toward their homes. And Duffy, now surrounded not by followers but by silence, lowered his weapon. Rage still burned behind his eyes, but even he knew when a fight was already lost. He spat in the dirt. This town's gone soft. No, Hannah said from the church steps. It's finally remembered it has a heart. Well, that night the stars came out early. And in the cabin by the blacksmith's shed, Ayanna and Elijah lit no fire. They didn't need warmth. They had each other. At dawn, Dry Hollow was quiet but not with peace. It was the hush that comes after something breaks, when the dust hasn't yet settled and everyone pretends not to see the cracks running through the walls they'd lived behind for too long. Elijah stood outside the cabin, hat in hand, watching the orange lights spill across the town like an apology that came too late. Ayanna sat nearby, braiding her hair. She hadn't said much since the showdown, neither had he. Words weren't needed, not after the night before. The town hadn't come for them. No torches, no ropes, not even Duffy. But that didn't mean they were welcome. He'll come back, Elijah said, eyes still on the horizon. Ayanna tied off the braid. I know. We can't stay. No, she agreed, but we can leave with our heads high. He nodded, not because it made things easier, but because it was the only direction left. They packed light. Elijah's saddlebag held a few tins, a worn journal, and a knife his brother gave him before the war. Ayana carried a medicine pouch, a string of beads from her mother, and the red bandana Elijah had wrapped around her the night she nearly drowned. Before they left, Hannah came. She didn't knock, just walked in holding a satchel and 2 canteens. "You'll need water," she said. "And bread, it's not much." Ayana hugged her without words. Hannah turned to Elijah, eyes searching. "You sure?" "No," he said, "but I'm going anyway." She smiled through tears. "Then go well." He looked at her a long time, grateful, guilty, and quietly broken all at once. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm not," she replied. "You found something worth fighting for. That's more than most folks in this town ever will." They rode out just before the sun hit its highest point, through the center of town. No one stopped them. Some watched from windows. Some looked away. Sheriff Duffy stood on the church steps, arms crossed, jaw set like stone. He didn't speak. Neither did Elijah. That silence said more than a gun ever could. Beyond the town limits, past the last signpost and the old wagon ruts, the land opened wide and free. The kind of place where fences didn't mean much and names didn't stick unless you wanted them to. They rode for hours without speaking. Finally, at a ridge overlooking the valley, Elijah pulled his horse to a stop. Ayana did the same. "This is the place," he said quietly. She tilted her head. "What place?" He looked out at the hills, the distant creek, the cluster of trees that offered shade like shelter. "Where we start over." She smiled. "Not from nothing. We carry everything that matters." He nodded, the weight of her words settling into his chest. Here there would be no church bells to judge them. No stairs from porches. No chalk on the doors. Just wind and earth and sky wide enough for two people who had been chased out of their own stories finally writing one together. That night they built a fire, shared bread, slept under the stars. He told her about Tommy, the brother who never made it back from Gettysburg. She told him about her mother who taught her to sing prayers into rivers. And somewhere between grief and flame, silence turned into something sacred. Not emptiness, but peace. In the months that followed, they built a cabin, piece by piece, beam by beam. Elijah worked with hands that had once built fences for men he didn't trust. Now those hands carved shelter for a life he'd chosen. Ayana planted herbs and corn near the creek, painted symbols above the doorway, each one a blessing, each one a memory. They laughed more, slept deeply, fought sometimes but never cruelly. And every evening they sat together on the porch, watching the sky change colors, holding hands, without needing to explain why. Sometimes a rider passed by and looked twice. Sometimes a wagon stopped and asked for water. But no one asked about ways, or names, or what gave them the right to be here. Because out here on the edge of everything, they finally belonged. To each other, to the land, to something no one else could take. One night as autumn settled and the leaves turned the color of rust and honey, Ayana handed Elijah a folded cloth. Inside, a small pair of moccasins. Soft, new, unworn. His breath caught. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. He pulled her close, held her like something too precious for words. And in that moment, under a sky older than prejudice, they wept. Not for what was lost, but for what they had found. Together, 20 years later. Dry Hollow had changed, but only just enough to pretend it hadn't. The saloon still served whiskey with more dust than fire. The general store still had squeaky doors and more gossip than goods. And the church bell still rang every Sunday, though the pews were emptier and the sermons softer. Sheriff Duffy was long gone, buried with his boots on, they said. Some remembered his growl, others remembered his fear. But no one mentioned the morning Elijah Grant and the native girl rode out of town except in whispers. That is, until the young man came back. He arrived just before dusk, riding a dark bay mare with strong legs and sharp eyes. He wore a leather vest, dusty boots, and a red bandana tied around his neck. His skin was bronze like sun-baked earth, his hair long, tied back with a string of blue beads. But it was his eyes, steady, green-gray like the Brazos River in flood season, that made old man Dalton nearly drop his pipe. The boy dismounted in front of the old blacksmith's barn. "Evening, son," the blacksmith said now. Older, slower, his hands no longer swinging, hammers but still strong with memory. "You looking for someone?" The young man nodded. "Just passing through. Name's Tom Redbird Grant." Silence fell like a dry curtain. The name landed in Dry Hollow like thunder on a quiet lake. The blacksmith blinked. "You kin to Elijah?" "My father," the young man said softly. "And your mother?" He smiled. "Ayana Redbird, my mother. Lakota." That silence deepened, not the kind made of fear anymore, but the kind made of shame. The blacksmith cleared his throat. I knew your father. Knew your ma, too. Brave people. Didn't deserve what this town gave them. Tom nodded. That's why I came. Not to stay, just to see the place. For them. He didn't ask for a room. Slept outside by the same blacksmith shed his father once leaned against. Lit a small fire. Took out a tin box from his satchel. Inside, letters yellowed, folded, fragile like dried leaves. His mother's handwriting. His father's words. He read one aloud that night, voice quiet like prayer. Son, if you ever come back here, don't go to prove a point. Go to understand. Go to forgive if you can. But if you can't, just remember you were born not of silence, but of choice. Yeah. In the morning, he walked to the river. The same bend. The same stones, though, older now. He took off his boots, stepped into the cold water like his mother once had. He closed his eyes, heard the wind, felt something shift. He imagined her hair dripping, eyes defiant. He imagined him pulling her out, not knowing he'd pulled out his own life too. And Tom whispered, thank you. To the river, to them, to everything. Right. On the way back, a woman waited on the edge of town, mid-30s, school teacher. Her dress plain but neat, her hands tucked behind her back. You're Elijah's son, she asked gently. Yes, my mother was Hannah Miller. He smiled, she saved them. The woman's eyes misted. She always said your mother had the strongest heart she ever saw. He nodded. That sounds right. She reached into her bag, pulled out a leather-bound book. She left this, said if anyone with your name ever came, give it to them. Tom took it, opened it. Inside, dried herbs. Drawings, sketches of a cabin, a baby's footprints. Pages written in 2 languages, English and Lakota. His mother's journal. He held it like treasure, like roots. Before leaving Dry Hollow, Tom did one last thing. He rode to the town square, dismounted, stood on the same wooden platform where his mother once declared her choice. He looked around, not many watched, just a few. But he said it anyway. 20 years ago, my parents chose each other in this town. Some of you turned your backs. Some of you stood by them. They're gone now, but I carry them. He tapped his chest. I'm not here to judge. I'm here to remember. And to say what they built out there was stronger than anything you tried to tear down. Then he tipped his hat and rode away. Where? Far beyond Dry Hollow in a quiet valley where wind still spoke through trees, a cabin stood, untouched by time. Inside 2 empty chairs, one worn red bandana, and on the wall carved into the wood, love is not the place we hide. It's the place we return to. Tom lit a fire and stayed. So